The studio lights were already blazing when Samuel L. Jackson took his seat, casting a clean, unforgiving glow across the polished desk in the familiar skyline backdrop. It was the kind of morning television calm that felt rehearsed down to the breath, warm smiles, gentle laughter, a promise of comfort with your coffee. Savannah Guthrie welcomed him with practiced ease, her tone friendly, her first question safely anchored to his latest film and the legacy he carried as one of Hollywood's most recognizable voices. Jackson responded smoothly, cracking a brief joke that earned a ripple of laughter from the crew. For a moment, it felt like just another polished appearance. But live television has a way of shifting without warning. Savannah pivoted, carefully at first, toward a comment Jackson had made weeks earlier during a podcast interview, one that had sparked debate online and drawn sharp reactions from critics and fans alike. Her phrasing was measured, but the intent was clear: clarification, accountability, a soundbite that would make sense to millions watching at home. Jackson's smile thinned, not vanishing but tightening at the edges. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped, eyes steady. He began to explain, laying out context with deliberate care, emphasizing how the quote had been clipped and circulated without the full conversation attached. Savannah listened, nodding, then pressed again. She cited the reaction, the responsibility of public figures, the impact of words when amplified. The temperature in the room rose by degrees, almost imperceptibly. Jackson's voice remained calm, but a familiar intensity crept in, the cadence sharpening as he chose each word. He spoke about nuance, about how conversations were being flattened into outrage, about how he'd spent decades speaking honestly even when it was uncomfortable. The audience seats felt suddenly closer, the cameras more intrusive. A producer glanced up from behind the monitors, sensing the shift. When Savannah interrupted, gently, but firmly, to redirect him back to the question, Jackson paused. His jaw flexed. He tried again, insisting the explanation mattered. Savannah reminded him of time, of format, of the need for clarity. The exchange was no longer casual, it was a tug-of-war conducted in complete sentences and polite smiles. Jackson's legendary patience thinned. He interrupted once, apologizing even as he did it, then continued, determined to finish a thought that felt essential to him. Savannah held her ground, her voice steady, eyes focused, doing what morning show hosts are trained to do: keep control, keep moving. The tension became palpable. You could feel it in the way the crew stopped fidgeting, in the way the laughter evaporated from the air. Jackson gestured with one hand now, emphasis replacing ease. He spoke about respect, not demanding it, but expecting space to speak fully. Savannah countered with the reality of live television and the responsibility to challenge guests. Neither raised their voice, yet every word landed heavy, amplified by the silence between sentences. It was no longer about the original comment, it was about control, about who guided the conversation and how far it was allowed to go. Then Jackson stopped mid-thought. He inhaled, exhaled, and looked around the studio as if seeing it anew, the cameras, the lights, the clock ticking toward commercial. He stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with a finality that cut through the room. He thanked Savannah for having him, thanked the crew for their work, his tone polite but unmistakably resolved. "I won't do this," he said simply, the microphone still live, the words hanging in the air like a dropped glass that hadn't shattered yet. Savannah froze for a fraction of a second, then straightened, professionalism snapping back into place. Jackson nodded once toward the cameras and stepped away from the desk. The studio fell silent, the kind of silence that feels louder than argument. A producer's hand shot up, signaling the cut, and the screen dissolved into a hurried commercial break as the room collectively exhaled, fully aware that millions had just witnessed a moment no one had planned. Behind the scenes, the shift was immediate and electric. The controlled hum of a live broadcast gave way to hurried footsteps and hushed voices as producers clustered near the monitors. Savannah Guthrie remained at the desk for a beat longer than necessary, gathering herself, eyes briefly closing as she recalibrated. When the cameras returned from commercial, she addressed viewers with a steady composure that only years of live television could produce, acknowledging the tension without inflaming it, thanking Samuel L. Jackson for joining them, and pivoting forward as if the ground beneath her hadn't just moved. Jackson, meanwhile, walked down a quiet corridor lined with framed photographs and muted carpet, the echo of his shoes sounding louder than it should have. The intensity that had driven him moments earlier softened into something more reflective. A producer caught up to him, not to argue, but to understand. Their conversation was brief and low, Jackson explaining that he welcomed hard questions, always had, but not at the expense of being heard. "You can challenge me," he said calmly, "just don't corner me." There was no shouting, no slammed doors, only the clarity of a boundary drawn. Word traveled fast through the building. Staffers exchanged glances, some stunned, others unsurprised. Live television thrived on unpredictability, but this was the kind that lingered. In a small office nearby, network executives replayed the moment, parsing tone and timing, already thinking ahead to statements and damage control. Outside the studio walls, phones buzzed. Clips hit social media before the show even wrapped, captions framing the moment from every imaginable angle. By midday, the internet had chosen sides. Some viewers applauded Jackson's decision to walk away, praising him for refusing to be reduced to a headline-friendly exchange. Others defended Savannah, arguing that journalists were meant to ask difficult questions and hold guests accountable. The clip looped endlessly, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame. Every pause, every glance, every interruption became evidence in a debate larger than the argument itself. Jackson released a short statement that afternoon, measured, thoughtful, unmistakably his. He thanked the show for the invitation and acknowledged Savannah's professionalism, emphasizing that disagreement didn't equal disrespect. He explained that he believed conversations worked best when both sides were given space, and that stepping away had felt like the only honest choice in the moment. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an attack either. It landed softly, intentionally. The next morning, Savannah addressed the moment on air. She spoke candidly about live television, about the balance between challenging guests and creating room for dialogue. She didn't diminish Jackson's feelings, nor did she retreat from her role. Instead, she framed the exchange as a reminder of how quickly conversations could escalate when stakes were high and time was short. Her tone was calm, reflective, and disarming, earning respect even from some who had criticized her the day before. As days passed, the heat cooled, but the moment remained. Media analysts dissected it as a case study in live broadcast tension. Talk shows referenced it obliquely, careful not to inflame old sparks. Jackson returned to his work, promoting his film through other outlets, where interviews felt longer, looser, more conversational. Savannah moved on too, guiding her show with the same steady hand, the incident becoming another entry in the long, unpredictable history of live TV. Yet something subtle had shifted. Viewers talked more openly about power dynamics in interviews, about how format could shape truth as much as questions did. The clip stopped being just a viral moment and became a reference point, a reminder that even the most polished environments couldn't fully contain human conviction. For Jackson, it reaffirmed a personal line he wouldn't cross. For Savannah, it reinforced the tightrope she walked every morning. In the end, there was no winner declared, no final word that settled the debate. Just a shared understanding that sometimes, friction reveals more than agreement ever could. The argument faded from headlines, but the image lingered, a man standing up from a chair under bright lights, and a host holding steady at her desk, two professionals colliding briefly, then carrying on, changed in ways only they would fully understand.